All right, guys. So today I just want to talk about a feature in ACSS or automatic CSS, which is the text line lengths, and why this does not work with bricks and how you can get it to work with bricks, and a little bit of a caveat around how you work with that. Now, by default, when you install ACSS, these are all turned off or set to blank. And I think the reason for that is they're probably looking for a solution. There's a issue with the way Bricks defines the default max width of elements, interfering with the way that ACSS sets these max widths. And there's been a lot of discussion around it, but it hasn't been resolved. And it's more of a question of CSS specificity and CSS rule order. So it's not just an ACSS thing. This is a general CSS issue that we need to know about and be concerned about. I'm going to show you a way where we can get this to work and what the caveat is on how you might want to use that if you want to override it in bricks. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you the problem. So these are all set, and if I have a look at my front end here, I've got three boxes here, and I'm using the text XXL, text XL, and text L, which are the ACSS utilities for those. Now, these should have the maximum characters set to 20, 30, and 35, but we're not seeing that. We're seeing these have no maximum whatsoever. And if we look at the first one, for example, this P here, and have a look at the elements in the styles in the Chrome DevTools, what we see here is our ACSS utility class for text XXL, and it's setting the max inline size, which is a modern property which takes into account your reading mode, and that in mine will translate to the same as max width. So what's happening here is we've got a rule that's got a single class. So the specificity is one class. We then have a default bricks rule, which is a single attribute. So the specificity of that ACSS utility class and this default bricks rule here are exactly the same. It's a specificity of one. So what that means is that with the way CSS works, it's because they're the same specificity, whichever one loads later is the one that's going to apply. And if you have a look here, we've got the ACSS utility here loading in automatic CSS, automatic.css, and we've got front end here, bricks assets loading in front end min.css. So if we look at the network here, we'll see that automatic CSS loads here, and then front end loads after that. So what that's going to do is, because this class here, this rule loads after that rule, and they've got the same specificity, this one here is going to be the one that applies. Now, there was a lot of conversation around this here and whether it should be changed. I think it's probably too late for that, because if bricks change this, they're probably going to break a lot of sites that are already existing. So I think we're going to be stuck with that as being the default, and we just have to live with that and work with that. From the automatic CSS side, if they make this too specific, then it's harder to override in the editor, and you'll get a lot more support calls from people going, this doesn't work, and it's because they don't understand how the CSS rule specificity is working. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these more specific so that they work, and then I'm going to show you how to solve the problem if we want to override those. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is I've got a WP Codebox script here, which I can share with you if you wish to. And basically I've got a Sass map with the sizes here. I'm putting a prefix here of a .bricks body, BRX body, and then I'm looping through each of these sizes, and I'm outputting a utility class for that size, basically setting it back to what it was in the first place. So if I enable that rule, I'm going to show you what that actually means. If I come into here, the front end now, and I do a refresh, now my ACSS settings, so these here are all actually applying now. because of that rule. Let's have a look at the actual code, and we can see here we've got now this .brx body.text XXL is basically setting this max line size back to the same size that automatic CSS was setting it to in the first place, which is overriding the default bricks. And the reason it is because we have a path that has two classes, which makes that more specific than the default. So that makes sense? Okay. Now, having a look at the CSS that's been generated by my Sass map, that's it there. So all it is, these rules here were already existing in automatic CSS. All I've done is iterate through them and prefix these with a bricks body to make them more specific. Okay. All right, so that's the CSS side of it and the generation of some overrides. Now, if I refresh my editor, and my editor refreshing is a little slow because I'm running on WP Local on a Windows machine, and for some reason it's a little bit slow to refresh all of that. Okay, now you can see in my editor, the ACSS line links are actually working in the editor as well because I've got the prefix there. Okay, so that fixes the problem, right? It does, but it also creates another problem. And that is, if I go into this first one here, so I go to my basic text, which I've got the text XXL on. If I want to override that, I'm going to create a class for this. I'm going to call test override. I'll call this XXL. Test XXL override. So I've got a class there. And I go to my style and in my layout, I'm going to set my max width to 40 CH. Nothing changed. Why is that? Let's have a look. Save that. Have a look at the front end. So here's my class here. I've got my ACSS utility for text XXL, and I've got my test override class that I've just created in bricks. And what we see here is my test override is one class. My override that I created through WP CodeBox is two classes in the path. So that is more specific than this. That's why it doesn't work. So that's the problem it creates when you make it more specific. Now to solve that, we can do one of two things. We can do the lazy mode, which is add important. So I'm adding important to that, and I'm telling it to override it. You can see in the editor it works. If we look at the front end, you can see in the front end it works. So now my class here, even though, see this is actually in Chrome, it's showing me the order that the rules should apply in, but because I've got this important keyword here, this overrides that. So it's really not a great way to do it because it interferes with the natural specificity rules of CSS. So you're kind of just fudging it to work, but then it doesn't look right because that should not be overriding that because that is more specific. So it's not a great idea to do this. It is a quick, lazy approach to it. But I'm going to show you another approach, which is a different way of thinking. And what we want to do is make our rule here more specific than that rule there. Now, fortunately, in bricks, if we have a look at the DOM over here, if I'm going to go to bricks content, so we've got this main here that's got an ID of BRX content. Now that's an ID. Now, ID selectors are more specific than CSS rule selectors, okay, or class selectors, I should say. So IDs are more specific than classes because technically there should only be one element of a specific ID, whereas a class can be applied to multiple elements, so they consider that an ID is more specific. So we can override by using that in our rule. How do we do that? Come back to our editor. I'm going to take that max size off there, go to my CSS tab. I'm going to add the ID of bricks content, then my root, and I'm going to put the what was the new class, sorry, the new rule called max inline size. Here we go. new property, I should say. Got to get my wording right. Maximum line size, make that say 50 CH there, and it works. So it works in the editor here. Let's have a look in the front end. And it works in the front end here. So if we look at the rules, here's our rule here. We've got our automatic CSS utility here, which is being overridden by the default bricks, which is getting overridden by our override we created with WP Codebox, which is getting overridden by the actual element because we've made that rule specific by putting a ID of bricks content, BRX content. So that's my preferred method. I would rather override it with specificity so that when you're looking in your dev tools and troubleshooting, it appears in the right order, because that is the one that is more specific. That will be the rule that applies. If you use the important keyword, it interferes with that. You might have a rule somewhere down here with important that's applying, but you've got more specific rules above it that aren't applying, and it gets really confusing when you're trying to work out which rules are applying. So I would say, rather than use important, use more specific rule paths. Okay, so that's it. That's the way I would deal with it, and that gets these working in bricks. Very simple overrides here, but then you need to be aware of the fact that you need, if you want to override on a specific instance or a specific element, you need to be very specific about that rule, or if you're lazy, you have to use the important keyword. So that's it. Hopefully that makes sense and it's something you can use, and if it is, please hit the like, please hit the subscribe. Thank you.